The popularity of the gladiatorial games as a celebration in the Roman world cannot be understated. These elite athletes held the fascination of the Roman people for more than 6 centuries. Pliny the Elder, a Roman historian during the 1st century AD and author of the Naturalis Historia, describes the celebrity-like status that gladiators held in the Roman way of life. When a freedman of Nero was giving a gladiatorial show at Antium, the public porticos were covered with paintings, so we are told, containing lifelike portraits of all the gladiators and assistants. This portraiture of gladiators has been the highest interest in art for many centuries now, but it was Gaius Terentius who began the practice of having pictures made of gladiatorial shows and exhibited in public, in honor of his grandfather, who had adopted him. He provided 30 pairs of gladiators in the Forum for 3 consecutive days, and exhibited a picture of the matches in the Grove of Diana. Welcome back to the 2nd episode in this series on gladiators in Roman society. In this episode, we will cover the role of the games and their place in the Roman festive calendar, the structure of these games, and their rules. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us, we couldn't be doing it without your help. Let us begin our exploration into the culture of Roman bloodsport by exploring the gladiator's place in Roman society. However, before we begin, it is important to note that there is a distinction between the gladiatorial games and other spectacles in the Roman calendar. Spectacles first appeared in the form of ludi, or games, during the early Republican period in the 4th century BC. The Ludi Romani were the first of the annual games of early Rome, beginning sometime around 366 BC, and were held annually in September. The main events of this festival, which were dedicated to Jupiter Optimus Maximus, consisted of a feast, chariot races, and a cavalry parade. This format of games slowly expanded to include the Ludi Plebii, the plebeian games, which originated in 220 BC and were celebrated annually in November. Later, in 212 BC, the Ludi Apollinaries, the games of Apollo, were established. The Ludi Apollinaries occurred every July. This is a small sample of the total number of festivals the Romans observed during their early history, which served as the precedent from which the gladiatorial games as we know them were born. The spectacles that featured gladiatorial combats were known as munus, which translates to duty or gift. It was the duty of governors and politicians to put these games on for the populace, which also helped them get re-elected to office. The munera were originally part of ritual funeral services, and retained that association throughout the Republican period and well into the Empire. However, they also acquired a connection with the Ludi when these magistrates added the gladiatorial games to the regular events of the Roman public games as an enhancement to their own prestige. Over the course of the calendar year, the number of gladiatorial games varied drastically, and they were not held as consistently as the many ludi that occurred annually. Of the 176 days reserved for spectacles in the year 354 AD, only 10 days in December were dedicated to gladiatorial games. However, the low count in this particular year is likely due to the declining popularity of the games and continuing rise of Christianity during the era of late antiquity. Outside of the festive calendar, the impact of gladiators on Roman life is evident. The Roman military was a great patron of the games, with some provincial military units owning their own gladiator schools. Gaius Marius, a Roman general and 7-time consul, introduced gladiatorial-style training techniques during his reformative period prior to the civil wars with Sulla, the famous dictator of the early 1st century BC. Even Julius Caesar, during his African wars, was compared to gladiatorial trainers as he shouted instructions to his freshest recruits. Livy states, "A man who knows how to conquer in a war is a man who knows how to arrange a banquet and put on a show." This connection to the military is most evident during Rome's greatest periods of expansion. The massive influx of warrior slaves, drawn from the conquered peoples of the Mediterranean, flooded the Roman slave markets, which in turn flooded the gladiator schools with raw recruits looking to change their fortunes. As the number of recruits increased, so too did the desire and demand to see them fight. Despite the military's patronage, there were times when gladiators were at odds with the Roman war machine. The rebellion of Spartacus in 73 BC is perhaps the most famous. Spartacus, an escaped gladiator of Thracian origin, managed to avoid capture for 2 years as he ravaged his way across the Italian peninsula with an army of freed gladiators. With that said, gladiators fought for their Roman masters as often as they did against them. During the year of the Four Emperors in 69 AD, Otho, second of the four emperors, fielded troops at the Battle of Bedriacum that included a detachment of some 2,000 gladiators. Further to this, in 238 AD, the Praetorian Guard was actively attempting to repress the Senate, which was currently in revolt against Maximinus Thrax, the emperor that preceded the crisis of the 3rd century. It was gladiators from the Ludus Magnus in Rome that emerged to drive the Guard back to their camp, and even laid siege to it. Gladiators and the military were inexorably intertwined, most evidently in the fighting styles the gladiators presented, reminiscent of Rome's enemies. In art, gladiators held a unique place in Roman society. Images of gladiators were found throughout the Roman Republic and Empire. The example given by Pliny the Elder at the beginning of this video provides a small insight into the reverence they held in the Roman mind. Mosaics, pottery, reliefs, graffiti, wall paintings, tombs and epitaphs, figures and statues found in the archaeological record support the records of Pliny and the lofty esteem gladiators were held in. There is even some evidence to suggest early forms of action figures were sold, depicting the current champions of the arena. Mosaics from Zliten in Libya show a fallen gladiator appealing for missio or mercy, while a referee restrains the victorious opponent. Whether they were restrained to avoid killing their opponent or purely for spectacle is up for debate. Epitaphs of gladiators were typically marked with a discernible pride, identifying their status, their style of fighting, and their records, which can be considered something akin to the career statistics of today's modern professional athletes. Many successful gladiators lived to retire from the occupation, and many more became wealthy enough to afford these beautifully carved and inscribed tombstones. An epitaph from a gravestone found in Sicily highlights this. Flamma Secutor. He lived 30 years, he fought 34 times, won 21 times, drew 9 times, and was spared 4 times. Syrian by birth. Delicatus made this tomb for a worthy comrade at arms. Graffiti in the ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum has been found in the houses of the rich and poor alike. They read like reports or recaps of a gladiator's career. Priscus of the Neronian school, 6 fights won. Herennius, freeborn, 18 fights, died. Albinus, left-hander, freeborn, 19 fights, won. The fascination with gladiatorial games was not limited to artists and spectators. Several emperors, including Caligula, Titus, Hadrian, Lucius Verus, and Caracalla, all participated in the games. None more so than Commodus, whose obsessive support of the games saw him compete in over 700 matches, which over his reign was approximately 1 match every 5 days. Having said all this, it must be remembered that despite their popularity, there was the ever-present fact that gladiators were slaves. Until they had earned their freedom, their lives were at the whim of their masters. Now that their position in society has been discussed, let us move on to the structure of the games themselves. The general rule is that spectacles in the Roman world fall into 6 major categories: horse and chariot racing, theatrical events, unarmed contests between humans, armed contests between humans, contests with beasts, and criminal executions. The Gladiatorial Munera dealt with armed and unarmed contests between humans, as well as contests with beasts. The spectacle would open with a procession, the Pompa, where the sponsors of the games, the prizes, equipment, and combatants were paraded in front of the spectators. The procession announced the official start of the games, not dissimilar to the opening ceremony of the modern Olympics. It is likely that the Pompa aided the gamblers in the audience by giving them the opportunity to see the physical stature of the fighters before their matches. The gladiators wore outlandish outfits and wielded specially designed weapons that loosely corresponded with the type of equipment used by soldiers on the battlefields. This included the tridents and nets of the retiarii, wide-brimmed helmets and thigh-high leg padding, the bent swords of the thracies, and the visored helmets and arm padding of the secutores. The fights appear to have begun with a blast of horns, accompanied by music, adding to the atmosphere and production of these spectacles. Gladiators would employ stage names to encourage the ever-increasing showmanship expected with the games. Some were serious, like Ferox, fierce, or Mukro, blade. while others had comedic elements, pugnax meaning fight lover, or pulcher meaning pretty boy, or hilarious meaning the Joker. As the games developed, they took on complex structures and rules. By the 2nd century AD, games included venationes or animal hunts and executions, often in various gruesome ways. Gladiators typically appeared and fought towards the end of the day, after the animals had been hunted and the condemned men and women executed. The rules of gladiatorial engagement, the lex pugnandi, have unfortunately been lost to us. As such, the rules discussed here are largely speculative and based on the archaeological evidence that has survived. The rules of engagement likely would have detailed what moves could and couldn't be used during a gladiatorial bout. The officials who supervised the matches, the summa rudis and secunda rudis, wore white tunics and carried a long rod, presumably to signal fouls from a safe distance. The summa rudis likely held the responsibility of ending a fight before a gladiator surrendered, perhaps to avoid serious injury or death. Some historians have suggested that the principal task of these referees might have been to prevent gladiators from seriously wounding or killing one another where possible. Though on the other hand, the power to allow a fight to continue or end it faced scrutiny from the spectators. An epitaph for the gladiator Diodorus from Amisus in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, blames the cunning treachery of the summa rudis for his death. According to the author of the epitaph, Diodorus was victorious in the match, but the referee compelled the gladiators to continue fighting, resulting in the gladiators' accidental death. Even in the ancient world, it was impossible to get consistent refereeing. There were two possible outcomes of a match: a draw, where both fighters were unable to gain the upper hand, or victory, where one gladiator triumphed over another, either by submission or death. Death was uncommon in gladiatorial matches, though not unheard of. The sine missione has often been translated as a fight to the death, but it is more akin to a fight to submission. The point of a gladiatorial match was not to kill, but to perform. It was an exciting, rule-bound contest of bravery in the face of death and of discipline and skill with arms. Much like spectators of modern sports, there is evidence to suggest that the audience appreciated not only the combat itself, but specifically the way gladiators fought. It was expected that gladiators fought in the styles they presented in. Mamiliones would fight like mamiliones, retiarii like retiarii, and so forth. The techniques and skills involved were understood and applauded by spectators and formed part of the alluring spectacle. Aficionados of gladiatorial games indicated their knowledge and interest in the fighting styles or tactics used by the various classes. These combat styles were standardized and well known enough to be understandable to a wider audience, outside of the specialized training these fighters received. Though socially gladiators ranked lowly in Roman society, their art was considered orderly enough to serve as a metaphor for rhetorical debate. Quintilian, a Roman educator during the 1st century AD, compared the skillful orator to a gladiator who does not attack with straight thrusts, but varies his assault. One of the major alluring factors of a gladiatorial fight was the uncertainty of the outcome. This idea is reflected in the fact that the skill level of the individual gladiators was graded under a rigid system based on the number of fights they had survived. Deliberate efforts were made to match gladiators of a similar skill level to ensure these fights were evenly matched. This helped ensure that combats were not one-sided affairs, where a fighter of rudimentary skills was not being helplessly slaughtered, but instead created dramatic fights between evenly matched opponents. It is evident that the spectators came to watch less out of raw bloodlust and more out of a desire to see exciting contests fought by trained experts. To defeat an opponent while not killing or even seriously maiming him was a demonstration of extreme skill and an ability to be boasted of and admired. Victory, not murder, was the goal. The spectacle of the gladiatorial games enjoyed a long run of popularity within the Roman way of life. This popularity extended to every level of Roman society, leaving no class free from its alluring grasp. Emperors participated in the games as contestants. The poor enlisted willingly with the hope of fame and glory. The wealthy ran gladiator schools like businesses, hoping to capitalize on the incredible popularity of these fighters and the waves of supporters that came to watch them. Though they were socially slaves, gladiators were athletes and celebrities who enjoyed the attention of the Roman world for centuries and reaped the benefits through the ultimate display of martial prowess that exemplified the military might of the Roman people. More videos on the life and society of the ancient Romans are on the way. To make sure you don't miss them, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely. Our videos would not be possible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.